Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. and, today I'm going to do another one of these. I guess it's sort of in the same spirit as stuff they've been teaching you wrong about D&D. And you know that we've got new school D&D is routinely criticized about its wussiness by old school D&D, and for good reason. I mean, as some you might not be aware of this, but some of you might know that I participated in the creation of 5th edition D&D. Now, that's not the game that I consider the ideal version of D&D by any measure. My favorite iteration of the OSR rule set is Lion and Dragon, which I also created. And there are two very, very different games for a whole bunch of reasons, right? One is much more focused on a specific style. That is to say, Lion and Dragon is made for medieval authentic play. D&D, you can do a lot more stuff with. And you also have, obviously, a very different mentality about how on the meta level, the players relate to their characters. And at the first glance, if someone were to read both of these, they would say, oh, wow. So, in Lion and Dragon, people must really not care that much about their characters, because they're so easy to kill. And over in the D&D Player's Handbook, well, there it's like that lets you get a much closer bond to your character. Well, yeah, in a way, I guess you could say that, except that it's not really true, because in Lion and Dragon, what happens is you care about any character that survives the first few sessions, right? And this is an example of challenge and growth built into actual play rather than front-loaded in an artificial fashion. I've talked about that before. So what I mean is, when you make a Lion and Dragon character at the start of the process, you have no idea what that character is, right? In fact, in Lion and Dragon, you're rolling randomly to determine their social class, their original background, which is not a detailed 50-page novelistic style saga about how much of a special snowflake the character is. It's just like, oh, okay, your character was, a burgher, or a villain. He grew up in a city, and he has the urban lore skill, and he was once an apprentice cook, and that's it, right? Something like that. So you have the cooking and the lore and the urban lore skill, right? And so all of that is being there's even a random names table. Now, you don't have to roll randomly for your character's name, but you certainly could, right? And of course, the random names table is based on what were actually the most popular English names in the 15th century. So, on the other hand, in the D&D Player's Handbook, you get to pick this background package, and it's got all these cool details, and then, of course, you're also expected to create this intricate backstory that's like out of a really bad, young adult TV series on the CW about your character and how special and wonderful they are, right? And so you start with, obviously, the D&D character, 5th edition D&D character, is going to have a much more detailed story at the beginning than the guy's like, oh yeah, you were a member of the urban poor who knows how to cook, right? That's it. But then when actual play starts to happen, what you get is, in the case of the D&D situation, the player is in a constant struggle against the reality of game mechanics. And it's a struggle that will either be assisted by the DM, in which case the whole world fails, it becomes faker and dumber, or it's opposed by the DM, in which case it is a constant battle, in that your character is assumed to have been a special creature of some kind, of wonderful person who did magical things and has this incredible story and did all this suffering and learning and whatever, and they're so cool and so special and so wonderful. And then you face a system that doesn't really insist on your wonderfulness, and a setting that the DM probably has their own ideas about what is important in that setting, which is not the idea you have of your character. So all of the D&D 5th edition game turns into this kind of conflict of this backstory you created, not for this setting, but for whatever, maybe generally for the setting. If you knew it was going to be a Forgotten Realms game, then you're not going to make a character that's meant for Greyhawk or whatever. But it's a character that wasn't made for the campaign, because you don't know what the campaign is going to be about except in the most general terms at the start of a campaign. Unless you've got one of these really new school DMs that is like telling you everything that's going to happen before it happens, then why the hell would you want to play that game, right? So you get into this fight because you've already pre-made a fake pre-made character, and they're then trying to apply it to what should be a real virtual world, and it fails, right? Then, on the other hand, in a game like Lion and Dragon, and it's not just Lion and Dragon, almost any old school RPG, any OSR game, you've got a character that gets dumped into a world where they are kind of a blank slate, and then you start filling in the gaps as you're playing. As you're going through the game, you start developing a bigger personality for that character. You sometimes will add bits of backstory that you will then connect to the world, right? If your character came from, Middleham and you end up going back to Middleham at some point in the adventure, then obviously you're going to do stuff that has to do with your past there, right? And a good DM will probably try to add some of that in to a certain degree anyways. So that's all stuff that could happen and that will enrich the player. But there's also the threat of constant death. And that's where we're really getting to in this video. So I guess, the title of this video was going to be the one thing you can do to make your campaign 100% more intense, right? And that's the one thing. It's got nothing to do with what I've just been talking about, but in a way it ties into it, and it ties into the two things you could do, right? Because the other thing you could do is you could try to, which is what we've been talking about now, is you could try to change the way you create characters and interact with characters, right? And interact with the world, so that your character gets less front-loaded as a pseudo character, right? It's like those characters, the way they're done by a lot of new school gamers and new school 5th edition D&D, it reminds me of in any series when you suddenly have a character that gets introduced, and that character, you are being told by the writer, this is a super awesome character and they're so much better than other characters, right? And you have to believe this, even though we haven't done any work to prove it, right? And then in the course of the game, they in the course of the series, they would usually go around, proving themselves better. It's like, I don't know, it's Captain America, and Miss Captain America is so much better. She's a better fighter than Captain America. She's actually the one that punched Hitler, and blah 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 blah, right? And stuff like that, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be because of feminism either or anything like that, but you see, it's the Poochie syndrome, right? Where where the creator wants desperately for everyone else to believe that this character is cool, but doesn't want to do anything organic to make it happen, right? So if you did a bit less of that, that would be really good. Now, in Lion and Dragon, you've got this situation, most OSR games, that characters die very easily. There's a very high mortality rate, and in some games, Lion and Dragon has a potentially quite high mortality rate. It has a few things that offset that. It depends, right? I mean, for one thing, it changes the way of the game, because in D&D 5th edition, there's very little reason not to have your characters just charge into battle, right? As long as they aren't worried of a total party kill, they're not going to die, right? There's the rest system, which is something I advised very strongly against when I was a consultant, means that your characters are just able to constantly, you have 3 saving throws against death, and if not, they're just not dead, and that's it. So they're okay. It doesn't matter, right? Like there's this push, and that all of that warping of the combat system, which then ironically means there's no incentive to be more clever than just go into combat, right? That warping of the combat system happened because players were expecting that their super special snowflake characters shouldn't die. Right, it's like, it's seen as a really terrible thing if one of your character dies, because that shouldn't happen, right? When in fact it should. That's a part of the reality of the RPG. So over in an old school game, a character will be playing along, and they might die in their first try. Like the the apprentice cook from Middleham might go off on defending a caravan. There's he got work as an assistant caravan guard. And first adventure, he gets shot in the head by a bandit with an arrow, and he's dead, and that's it, right? Or he'll die from an infection from the wound. You could do that too in Lion and Dragon, right? And that's the end. So in that case, that's not going to be the most memorable of characters you've ever played. But you know what? That means you can make a new character. And one of those characters is going to get to level 1 or level 2 or level 3 or level 5, right? And eventually they're going to become pretty goddamn cool, because in the process of that, your character has done all kinds of things that happened inside the world. It's not that you just decided these things happened and just made it so by waving your magic wand. No, you have done it. You've made the character like that. Now, what's the last thing that you need for that character to keep always being cool? The threat of death, okay? Because even in many old school games, one of the problems you see, high-level characters become super hard to kill. And I mean, it's fine to a certain extent. They should be hard to kill. But there should always be a risk anytime a character gets into some kind of a fight that isn't, just against vastly, ridiculously overwhelming odds, underwhelming odds, I guess I should say. In anything against, having the greatest swordsman in the land against a zero-level peasant, anything better than that, there should be at least some slight chance that the character's going to die. And even in old school D&D, you got to this problem where when you got to name level, more or less, and you had the raise dead magic, suddenly you know you're never going to die. Only a TPK will kill off your party. If one asshole out of the whole bunch survives, he runs off back to town, or if he's a cleric, if the one survivor is a cleric, you're golden, right? You just leave the cleric in the other room while you fight the bad guys. Everybody's dead. Okay, the cleric grabs everyone, word of recall, raise dead, and suddenly you're all back to life, right? And it's obviously even worse in the D&D 5th edition, because there it's really, really hard to die in the first place. But beyond that, it's very, very easy to come back if you've died. This is not good stuff. No. That is exactly the thing that is most limiting to your campaign. Because it's as though it's funny that in OSR play, you're doing everything right. You're making it really matter for the character all the way through until they get to a certain point where then suddenly they're becoming too easy to revive, and that's ironically the point that most people agree the game seems to become less fun, right? So how does it not become less fun? Well, in Lion and Dragon, you can't raise the dead. I mean, it might be possible, but there's no raise dead spell. There's no automatic magic that you'll get at a certain level point, or that you'll be able to easily purchase from some temple that will raise a dead character. If you want to make your games more intense and more meaningful in your play, if you're an old school gamer, my advice to you is get rid of raise dead. There's a couple of games that have done this, right? One that I'll admit was the reason why in Lion and Dragon you can't raise the dead. I mean, Lion and Dragon started out of my Dark Albion campaign. My Dark Albion campaign eventually came to be using the rules that are almost like what Lion and Dragon, the book, is today. But at the very beginning, like 5 years earlier, it started as a Lamentations campaign, Lamentations of the Flame Princess. And then gradually evolved through a bunch of house rules into less and less that and more what looks like Lion and Dragon today. But Lamentations was the first OSR game I know of that said, no, screw this, get rid of Raise Dead. That makes it way more badass. That's absolutely correct. Kudos to James Raggy on that thought, right? If you take away that, then you create the chance that there's still skin in the game for the high level character, right? And if you're a new school player, you've got 3 tasks ahead of you, really, right? The first is stop filling your character with pre-made backstory that'll only get in the way of discovering who that character really is supposed to be. Because as soon as you've decided before you start playing then you're going to try to force the world to fit that vision instead of you starting with less and then filling in the character in symbiosis with the world. And that's what you want to do. Step 2, if you're a DM, do something about the, the short rest and the multiple healing saves, right? Make it hard, make it a lot harder to heal and a lot easier to die. And number 3, get rid of Raise Dead, right? Now, does this mean if a character dies, they're absolutely guaranteed dead forever? Well, no, not necessarily, right? You could make it that there are certain ways to bring back the dead, but it ought to involve something really epic, right? Or something with a terrible cost. So, for example, in Lion and Dragon, in theory, someone could come back from the dead, but I mean, the easiest way they could come back from the dead is as an undead, and that's not too good, right? That makes them basically corrupted forever and evil, and you can do it, but it's not great. The second would be if you could potentially get some kind of alchemical method, but that's also inevitably going to be very difficult, very hard to do. The third is possibly a really powerful miracle from a really, really advanced holy man, right? So that could happen. And then, of course, God would demand some kind of epic payment for that, right? Which would probably be to do some truly epic quest-like thing with great consequences if you don't, right? So that's the sort of stuff you can do. You can also, by the way, try to figure out a potion of immortality in the alchemy, the highest level of the alchemy magical skill. You could try to learn. Oh yeah, and then that's really funny because there's all kinds of ways that could go wrong. But that's the point. The point is that something like the return from death should be worthy of myth, right? And the avoidance of death should be filled with potential pitfalls. And if you can do that, whether you're playing old school or new, then you're going to be able to change the whole intensity and feel of the game. And some of your players might be really freaked out about that at first. They might be very pissed off the first time one of their characters dies, especially if you're playing, 5th edition with total new school players that have no previous context of this, like they're expecting to just respawn or something. They might be really having trouble accepting this at the beginning, but do what you need to convince them to give it a shot. They start new character, move on with that, be sure to add the lethality and the brutality of death into what happens in the world in terms of how people react, right? And for the death of any character to have some kind of a significance, in the sense that it's something real and final, right? And so make there be consequences within reason of what is normal for how there should be consequences, right? And if you do all that, then you're going to see that the players, their characters are going to become something much more real to them. And the risk of losing it means that they're going to change the way they play into a different, smarter, more cautious style of play. I was saying earlier, right, the fact that you make it so easy to survive combat doesn't make for smarter gaming, it makes for dumber gaming, right? Because you assume you're going to win, and if you don't win, you assume you're going to survive, right? In old school combat, you never necessarily assume that, and so you have to be trickier, sneakier. You have to try to scare off opponents. You have to try to avoid opponents. You have to try to get the treasure without fighting things, or you have to be more watchful of traps. All of that sort of stuff. That stuff I mentioned is just in the context of dungeoneering, right? So like if you're running a political intrigue campaign and your player is sure that their character is basically protected by the script because they're one of the PCs and PCs don't die, then they're going to act a lot dumber than someone that knows that at any moment they could be assassinated, right? And that it would stick, that they would really die, that they're not just going to be raised dead 2 minutes later. So this is what you want to do. If you do this, you can have better campaigns. Take it from Uncle Pundit. All right, so I guess that's it for today. If you like this video, please be sure to subscribe, share it anywhere that people might find it useful. or if it pisses them off. I guess maybe some people could be pissed off by this video. It's definitely not one of the more controversial ones I've done. Check out my YouTube channel if you haven't already to see my much more controversial videos. And if you want to support me, well, you can send me money directly via PayPal or Patreon. But what I would really suggest is you check out my products, my books like Lion and Dragon or The Old School Companion, or my PDF series like the RPG Pundit Presents series, which has 103 issues. The link is in the description below. You can pick out any of those 103 issues. You're going to find something there that you're going to want out of all of them. Probably a lot of some things. There's adventures, there's random tables, there's magic items, there's monsters, there's setting stuff, there's medieval authentic stuff, there's weird science fantasy gonzo stuff. And they all cost, anywhere between 99 cents and $4.99. So you're going to get something for yourself that you can use in the game, and then it's also like you're buying me a coffee. That's all I really ask. But if you want to spend, Lion and Dragon is not that expensive. I think the hardcover is $29. That's a really good deal nowadays compared to what other games are charging for the price, right? So be sure to check out all my products and share this video, spread the word. It's always welcome. Currently smoking Italian red bark plus Argento Latacchia. Yeah.